My boss said I'd never earn six figures, but she didn't expect who signed my $1.2 million contract. I never believed someone could destroy your career with just one sentence until Marion Locke looked me dead in the eye and said I'd never amount to anything. The boardroom felt like a courtroom, and I was already convicted. I stood at the front, my presentation barely 3 slides in, when Marion Locke raised her hand and cut me off mid-sentence. Her smile was thin and sharp like a razor blade. "That's enough, Raymond," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "You're reliable, but let's be honest, you'll never earn 6 figures in this company. You're just not built for leadership." The executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Someone coughed. My mouth went dry as I forced myself to smile politely, nodding like her words hadn't just gutted me in front of everyone who mattered. Inside, though, something fundamental broke. Or maybe it finally woke up. I gathered my notes with trembling hands while Marion continued the meeting as if I'd already left the room. That moment would change everything, but neither of us knew it yet. 15 years earlier, Marion and I were different people working at the same consulting firm. We were young, ambitious, and stupid enough to think office romances stayed secret. For 3 months, we met after hours, shared coffee before dawn, and talked about futures we'd build together. Then I discovered she was engaged the entire time, planning a wedding while kissing me in empty conference rooms. When I confronted her, she laughed it off like it meant nothing. I ended things immediately. She married her wealthy fiancé 2 months later, and I thought that chapter was closed forever. But the past never stays buried when you work in the same industry. Now she was my boss, and that old betrayal poisoned every interaction between us. Some wounds never heal, they just wait. Marion wore professionalism like a mask, but behind closed doors, she made my life systematically miserable. She assigned me projects with impossible deadlines, then criticized me for asking reasonable questions. During team meetings, she praised everyone except me, letting the silence speak volumes. Worst of all, she started planting seeds of doubt about my character. I overheard her telling another manager that I seemed bitter and couldn't move past old grudges. People who'd worked with me for years suddenly avoided eye contact in hallways. My project proposals disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. She was erasing me slowly, carefully, and almost invisibly. Nobody would believe me if I complained because Marion was brilliant at playing the victim. So I stayed quiet and documented everything. Evelyn noticed I'd stopped talking at dinner. My wife had this way of reading silence better than most people read words. Finally, over pasta neither of us was eating, she set down her fork and asked what was wrong. I told her about work without mentioning names or old history, just that my new supervisor seemed determined to push me out. Evelyn listened completely before speaking. "Don't let anyone dictate your worth, Raymond," she said quietly. "They'll regret it if you stay true to yourself." Her words settled into my chest like an anchor. That night, lying awake while she slept beside me, I realized I'd been fighting the wrong battle. I didn't need to prove Marion wrong. I needed to prove myself right. The difference seemed small, but it changed everything. Marion called me into her office on a Friday afternoon without warning. "Performance review," she announced, closing the door behind me. For 30 minutes, she dissected my work with surgical precision, finding fault in projects that had previously earned praise. Her final verdict: I lacked initiative and needed a development plan to address concerning patterns. I knew what this was. Documentation to justify firing me later. When I stood to leave, I caught her reflection in the window behind her desk. She was smiling, a tiny satisfied curve of her lips she thought I couldn't see. That smirk confirmed what I'd suspected all along. This wasn't business. This was personal revenge dressed up in corporate language, and she was enjoying every second of my professional humiliation. I started staying late, not because I loved the job anymore, but because the empty office let me think clearly. One evening, while printing reports, I noticed a folder on the shared printer labeled "Confidential" with Marion's name. Inside were proposal documents for a major contract, one that mentioned her husband's investment firm as a key stakeholder. The conflict of interest was obvious and probably against company policy. I stood there for 5 full minutes, holding evidence that could end her career. Then I made one quiet copy, filed it carefully in my bag, and left the original exactly where I'd found it. I wasn't ready to use it yet. Maybe I never would. But knowing it existed gave me something I'd lost, a sense of control over my own fate. My old colleague David found me at a coffee shop near the office. We'd worked together years ago before he moved to Apex Logistics Consulting, a smaller but growing firm across town. Over espresso, he mentioned they were expanding rapidly, looking for experienced professionals to lead a major government contract bid. "You'd be perfect for this," he said casually. "Your reputation in the industry is solid, despite wherever you're working now." Something clicked in my mind, not revenge, but evolution. Maybe the answer wasn't fighting Marion on her territory. Maybe it was building something better somewhere else. I took David's card and promised to think about it. Walking back to the office that afternoon, the building looked smaller somehow, less important than it had that morning. Marion organized a regional meeting and deliberately paired me with Kyle, her favorite young employee fresh out of graduate school. For 2 weeks, Kyle and I developed a logistics optimization proposal. I did the research, built the models, and wrote the presentation. Kyle showed up to meetings and nodded. When we presented to the regional director, Kyle delivered my words flawlessly. Afterward, Marion publicly praised him. "See, Raymond," she said, her hand on Kyle's shoulder. "Fresh energy pays off." Kyle looked uncomfortable but said nothing. I smiled tightly and congratulated him, playing the gracious mentor. Inside, I was done. Completely, irrevocably done. That night, I emailed David asking about opportunities at Apex. Some bridges you don't burn, you just stop maintaining them until they collapse naturally. The rumors started subtly, whispers that I'd made inappropriate advances toward Marion years ago. HR scheduled a meeting with me, their faces professionally neutral. I came prepared with emails, project logs, and timestamps that documented every interaction we'd had. I spoke calmly, factually, without emotion or accusation. The evidence spoke for itself. Marion and I maintained purely professional contact, and her recent performance reviews of me contradicted any claim of harassment. HR thanked me and closed the matter within days. I never found out what they told Marion, but her expression when we passed in the hallway told me everything. Her attempt to destroy my reputation had failed, and worse, I'd handled it with the exact professionalism she'd always accused me of lacking. The power dynamic between us shifted invisibly that day. They removed me from the Morrison Project, an initiative I'd proposed, researched, and built from nothing. Marion reassigned it to Kyle, citing the need for new perspectives. That decision broke something final inside me. I went home that evening, opened my laptop, and wrote my resignation letter in one sitting. The words flowed easily because they were true. I was grateful for opportunities to grow, wished the company continued success, and looked forward to new challenges. Then I saved it without sending it. Instead, I created a new folder on my desktop and titled it simply, Next Chapter. Inside, I began documenting everything I'd learned, every skill I'd mastered, every connection I'd built. Marion thought she was erasing me. She was actually setting me free. If you're finding this story gripping, please like and subscribe to follow Raymond's journey to the end. I submitted my resignation with 2 weeks' notice and zero drama. Marion acted surprised and disappointed, gathering the team for a farewell speech about how necessary changes sometimes led to better opportunities for everyone. She smiled warmly while shaking my hand, and I smiled back with equal insincerity. What she didn't know was that I'd already signed an offer letter from Apex Logistics Consulting. David had fast-tracked my interview process, and their CEO had personally called to welcome me aboard. My official title was Senior Strategic Consultant, but David hinted at rapid advancement if I performed well. On my last day, I cleaned out my desk while Marion watched from her office window. I could feel her satisfaction radiating across the floor. Let her enjoy it while it lasted. Apex was everything my old company wasn't: lean, hungry, and merit-based. Within 3 weeks, I'd streamlined their client intake process and identified cost-saving measures that impressed the executive team. People actually listened when I spoke in meetings. My ideas weren't dismissed or stolen, they were implemented and credited. Meanwhile, through industry contacts, I heard whispers that Marion's division was struggling. The Morrison project I'd started was failing under Kyle's leadership. Client complaints were increasing. 2 senior employees had quit without explanation. I felt no satisfaction hearing this, only a quiet sense of validation. I'd been holding that team together without realizing it, and now the cracks were showing. Marion had wanted to prove I was expendable. Instead, she was proving the opposite to everyone watching. The $1.2 million government contract for logistics modernization landed on my desk like fate wrapped in bureaucracy. Apex had been shortlisted to bid, and I was assigned to lead the proposal team. For days, I immersed myself in requirements, regulations, and strategic planning. Then I reached the section listing competing bidders. My coffee went cold in my hand as I read the third name on the list, Marion's company. The universe had just handed me the opportunity I'd never dared imagine. We'd be competing directly for the same transformative contract, evaluated by the same government panel. I could have recused myself, claimed conflict of interest. Instead, I closed the document, took a deep breath, and started building the best proposal of my entire career. I told no one at Apex about my history with Marion or her company. This wasn't about revenge, it was about excellence. I assembled a team of specialists and worked 16-hour days refining every detail of our proposal. We focused on sustainability, ethical sourcing, and long-term value rather than just low pricing. I built in transparency measures and accountability structures that went beyond requirements. Every section was airtight, innovative, and legally spotless. I wasn't playing defense anymore, reacting to Marion's attacks. I was playing offense, building something genuinely better than anything she could create. Late nights at the office, I'd remember her words, "You're just not built for leadership." Each memory fueled another hour of focused work. She'd told me who I wasn't. I was about to show everyone who I actually was. Through a mutual contact, I heard that Marion was supremely confident about winning the contract. She'd apparently told her board the deal was as good as ours, and dismissed competing bids as formalities. When someone mentioned Apex's proposal looked strong, she'd laughed openly. That dinosaur, Raymond Holt? He'll be lucky if they remember his name by the time evaluations finish. Her arrogance was blinding her to reality. She assumed I was still the person she'd broken in that boardroom, diminished, doubting, defeated. She couldn't imagine that humiliation had forged me into someone stronger. Her biggest mistake wasn't underestimating my abilities. It was underestimating what happens when you give someone with nothing left to lose a clear target and the skills to hit it perfectly. 3 weeks before the final decision, I discovered that Marcus Chen was on the government selection panel. Marcus had mentored me early in my career, teaching me everything about ethical consulting and sustainable logistics. We'd lost touch over the years, but he'd always said I had integrity that couldn't be taught. When he saw my name on the Apex proposal, he reached out personally. Over lunch, he didn't ask about the contract directly, that would have been inappropriate. Instead, he asked about my journey, my values, and why I'd moved to Apex. I answered honestly, without mentioning Marion or old grudges. Marcus nodded thoughtfully throughout. Later, I learned he'd privately vouched for my character and track record during panel discussions. That credibility, earned over years of consistent work, tipped scales I didn't even know needed balancing. The charity gala was unavoidable, one of those industry networking events where absence gets noticed. I wore my best suit and prepared for the inevitable encounter. Marion spotted me near the silent auction, her smile bright and fake for the cameras around us. She approached with champagne in hand, her voice dropping low when she reached me. "I hope you're enjoying your little rebound job, Raymond," she said sweetly. "It must be nice playing in the minor leagues after striking out with the big teams." I met her eyes calmly and smiled with genuine warmth. "Just doing what I do best, Marion, staying consistent." She blinked, confused by my lack of defensiveness. I excused myself politely and walked away. She had no idea how prophetic that simple line would become. The leak happened without my involvement, though Marion immediately suspected me. Someone inside her company released internal documents exposing her husband's financial stake in their contract bid, a clear conflict of interest that violated government procurement rules. The story spread through industry channels like wildfire. Marion launched an internal investigation, certain I'd somehow orchestrated it. The irony was perfect, I'd never used that information I'd copied months ago. Turned out her own assistant, tired of being bullied and scapegoated, had independently discovered the same documents and reported them anonymously. Marion's paranoia about me had made her sloppy about actual threats. Her credibility was crumbling from the inside while she obsessed about external enemies. Sometimes the best revenge is simply stepping back and letting karma work. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Apex's CEO gathered the proposal team in the conference room, his face unreadable. Then he smiled. "We won. The $1.2 million government contract was ours." The selection panel had praised our proposal's integrity, innovation, and long-term sustainability, exactly the values I'd insisted we prioritize. Team members cheered and hugged. Someone opened champagne left over from a previous celebration. I stood quietly, feeling something profound shift inside my chest. This wasn't just a contract. It was validation that doing things right, thoroughly, ethically, consistently, actually mattered. I thought about calling Evelyn immediately, but decided to wait. This moment deserved to be savored privately before becoming public knowledge. In the back of my mind, though, I wondered when Marion would find out. That notification was coming soon. The contract results went public on the government procurement website at exactly 3 p.m. Within an hour, my phone started buzzing with congratulations from industry contacts. By evening, the full list was circulating, including companies that had been disqualified. Marion's firm appeared under disqualified due to conflict of interest, ethical violations. Directly below that line, in bold, contract awarded to Apex Logistics Consulting, lead consultant, Raymond Holt. I imagined her reading those words, the color draining from her face as she realized what had happened. The man she'd humiliated, dismissed, and tried to destroy had just won the biggest contract of the year. I didn't gloat or celebrate publicly. I simply forwarded the announcement to Evelyn with a short message: "Remember what you told me about staying true to myself? Thank you." Marion's world collapsed rapidly. Her company's board demanded immediate explanations for the ethics violations. Her husband, facing scrutiny over his investment firm's practices, quietly withdrew financial backing from several of her projects. HR launched a formal review of her management practices, and several employees came forward with complaints. Within a week, Marion resigned for health reasons, and the company issued a carefully worded press release about pursuing new directions. Meanwhile, I was offered a speaking slot at the National Logistics Conference, discussing ethical procurement and sustainable business practices. The invitation included a generous fee and all expenses paid. I accepted, thinking about how different my life looked now compared to that boardroom humiliation just months earlier. Success, it turned out, was the quietest and most complete form of vindication. A business journalist covering the procurement scandal contacted me for comment. I almost declined, then reconsidered. She asked thoughtful questions about integrity in competitive bidding and how companies could rebuild trust after ethical failures. At the end, she asked if I had any advice for professionals facing workplace adversity. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes, the people who underestimate you are the ones who teach you your true value, I said. They push you to prove, not to them, but to yourself, what you're actually capable of achieving. The article published 3 days later with that quote as the headline. My phone exploded with messages from former colleagues, friends, and even strangers who'd experienced similar situations. I'd accidentally become a voice for everyone who'd ever been dismissed or diminished. The irony was beautiful. The email arrived late on a Thursday night, Marion's name appearing in my inbox like a ghost. The subject line was empty. The message contained just one sentence: "You won, Raymond. I hope it makes you happy." I read it 3 times, searching for hidden meanings or traps. There were none, just exhausted defeat wrapped in 11 words. For a moment, I considered responding, maybe offering some gracious acknowledgement of our shared history. Then I realized she didn't deserve my words, positive or negative. Instead, I archived the email without replying and closed my laptop. The next morning, I took Evelyn to her favorite breakfast spot. We talked about vacation plans, her work projects, and absolutely nothing related to Marion or contracts or revenge. I laughed for the first time in months, really laughed, and it felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath forever. Kyle reached out 6 months later, asking to meet for coffee. He looked different, older, more uncertain. Over lattes he barely touched, he apologized for taking credit for my work and staying silent when Marion humiliated me. "You were the only one who actually deserved that promotion," he admitted. I knew it then, but I was too scared of her to say anything. "I'm sorry." His honesty surprised me. I could have been cold or dismissive. Instead, I shook his hand and told him everyone makes mistakes early in their careers. What mattered was learning from them. He seemed relieved, grateful even. As he left, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about excusing what happened. It was about refusing to let bitterness poison my future. That was my real victory, not the contract or money, but keeping my humanity intact through everything. The signing ceremony for Phase 2 of the government contract took place in a historic building downtown. Media attended, cameras flashing as officials and consultants gathered around a massive mahogany table. As lead consultant, I was asked to sign the final page and add a personal note for the archives. I held the heavy pen, thinking about everything that had led to this moment, the humiliation, the doubt, the quiet rebuilding. Then I wrote slowly, carefully, "To those who doubted, thank you for the push." Cameras captured the moment as I set down the pen. My name, my dignity, my success, all earned the right way, through persistence and integrity rather than shortcuts or sabotage. Later, driving home through the city, I realized I'd stopped thinking about Marion weeks ago. She'd become irrelevant, a footnote in someone else's cautionary tale. I'd moved forward, and that was the most peaceful revenge imaginable.